June 18th, 1945. 1437. Temporary holding facility. Lüneburg Heath, Germany. Afternoon sun beat down on cracked asphalt, where 217 German women stood in ragged formation, arranged in rows by British soldiers who moved with efficient indifference. Lotte Neumann stood in the third row, 7th position, trying not to sway from hunger that had progressed beyond pain into strange floating sensation, where her body felt disconnected from her mind. She was 26 years old. She hadn't eaten in 4 days. Her Wehrmacht auxiliary uniform hung on a frame that had shed 20 pounds in the past 6 weeks, fabric loose where it had once fit properly. Her hands trembled continuously, not from fear, though she was terrified, but from malnourishment severe enough that her body had begun consuming its own muscle tissue for fuel. Beside her, Hannah Vogel whispered, "They're separating us." Her voice carried resignation rather than panic. Hannah was 32, from Hamburg, had worked Wehrmacht communications until British forces overran their position on June 14th, 4 days ago. 4 days of no food, no water, except what they'd found in rain puddles, no information about what came next. The British had processed them through initial screening yesterday, names, ranks, units recorded in ledgers, but hadn't provided sustenance beyond single cup of water per person. The message was clear: feed yourself or starve. Except there was nothing to feed on. British soldiers moved through the formation, gesturing for women to move left or right. The sorting criteria wasn't obvious. Not by age, not by rank, not by physical condition. Arbitrary selection, which made it more terrifying. Lotte watched women being directed to different sections of the asphalt, creating smaller groups that would presumably be transported to different locations. Different locations meant different fates. She wanted to believe transport meant food eventually, but hope required energy she didn't have. A British corporal approached Lotte's row. He was young, maybe 24, with sunburned face and expression of exhausted boredom. He pointed at Lotte and 4 women near her, gestured toward the left section. "You lot, over there." His English meant nothing to her, but the gesture was clear. "Move." Lotte moved. Her legs felt insubstantial, muscles weak enough that walking required concentration. She joined maybe 30 other women in the left section, all of them exhibiting similar signs of severe malnutrition: hollow faces, protruding bones, movements that were slow and deliberate because speed was impossible. They stood there for 20 minutes while sorting continued. The sun was relentless, turning the asphalt into radiator that cooked from below while the air cooked from above. Lotte felt sweat run down her back despite dehydration, her body spending precious water it couldn't afford to lose. She closed her eyes, trying to find some internal reserve of strength, finding only emptiness where strength used to live. Boots on asphalt. Heavy, measured steps. Lotte opened her eyes to see a British sergeant approaching their group. He was older than the corporal, maybe 38, with dark hair and a face that showed every year of the war. His uniform was dusty, sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms that were lean and tanned. He carried a clipboard and what looked like a canteen on his hip. Sergeant Thomas Brennan, she'd learn later. From Manchester, veteran of North Africa and Normandy. Assigned to prisoner processing because he spoke enough German to function without constant interpreter assistance. He stopped 10 feet from their group and surveyed them with eyes that registered their condition without visible reaction. Professional assessment, documenting damage without commenting on it. Then he spoke in heavily accented German, rough but comprehensible. "You are now under my supervision. You will come with me to transport. No talking, no trouble. Verstehen?" The women nodded mutely. Understanding wasn't the problem. Compliance required no energy. They would follow because resisting was impossible. Brennan gestured toward trucks parked at the facility's edge. "Walk. Langsam. Slow." They walked. 30 women moving in loose formation, Brennan leading, 2 younger British soldiers flanking. The walk was maybe 200 meters but felt like miles. Lotte's vision narrowed to tunnel, focusing only on the ground immediately ahead, placing one foot in front of the other through conscious effort. Beside her, Hannah stumbled. Lotte caught her elbow instinctively, steadied her, felt how light Hannah had become, like steadying a child rather than an adult woman. The trucks were canvas-covered lorries, 4 of them, arranged in a row. Brennan directed the women toward the first truck. In. Sit. Climbing into the truck bed required pulling oneself up using the tailgate. Lotta tried twice, couldn't generate sufficient strength. Brennan noticed, stepped forward, and grabbed her arm. Not rough, just functional. Lifted her enough that she could get a knee onto the tailgate, then scramble into the truck bed. He did this for 6 women, efficiently assisting those too weak to climb unassisted, showing neither impatience nor particular kindness, just task completion. When all 30 women were loaded, packed tightly on wooden benches that ran the length of the truck bed, Brennan climbed in last. He remained standing near the tailgate rather than sitting, maintaining sight lines to everyone. The truck engine started with a diesel cough, then lurched into motion. The drive lasted maybe 40 minutes, winding through countryside that was impossibly green after weeks in bombed-out cities. Lotta watched trees pass, fields of crops growing, occasional intact buildings that hadn't been touched by war. The normalcy was surreal, this pastoral landscape existing alongside the devastation she'd left behind. The truck stopped at what looked like a converted estate. Large manor house surrounded by outbuildings and high fencing. Guards at the gate checked paperwork, waved the trucks through. They drove to a courtyard and stopped. Brennan jumped down from the tailgate, turned back to face the women. Out. Follow me. They climbed down, some jumping, some being assisted by Brennan and the other soldiers. Lotta's legs nearly collapsed when she hit the ground, knees buckling, but she locked them and stayed upright through sheer will. Falling meant being left behind, and being left behind meant she didn't know what. But instinct said staying with the group was safer than separating. Brennan led them toward a smaller building, single-story structure with windows and a door that was propped open. He gestured for them to enter. Inside. Sit. The interior was a large room, maybe a former dining hall or common area, with long tables and benches. The floor was concrete, swept clean. The walls were whitewashed. Windows let in afternoon light that was gentler than the brutal sun outside. It smelled like disinfectant and old wood, and something else Lotta couldn't identify until she saw the source. Large pots on a table at the room's far end, steam rising. Food. The smell was food. Brennan positioned himself at the front of the room, clipboard in hand. He waited until all 30 women were seated, packed onto benches, bodies pressed together from lack of space, then spoke in his rough German. You have been assigned to my work detail. You will remain here for processing and assignment. First, you eat, then medical examination, then housing. Any questions? No one had questions. Questions required cognitive capacity they'd exhausted. Brennan nodded, as though this was expected response. He gestured to the 2 younger soldiers who'd accompanied them. Begin distribution. The soldiers moved to the table with the pots, began ladling contents into small metal cups, tin cups, military issue, dented from use. They filled 30 cups, arranged them on a tray, then began distributing them along the tables. Each woman received 1 cup, perhaps 6 ounces of liquid, steam rising. Lotta accepted her cup with shaking hands. The metal was hot enough to be uncomfortable, but she gripped it anyway, feeling warmth seep into palms that had been cold despite the June heat. She looked into the cup. Soup. Thin but genuine. Broth with visible particles of vegetable and maybe meat. The smell made her stomach cramp violently, saliva flooding her mouth so quickly she had to swallow repeatedly. Around her, women stared at their cups with identical expressions of disbelief and desperate hunger. No one drank. Drinking required believing this was real, that the cups wouldn't be snatched away, that this wasn't elaborate cruelty designed to make deprivation more devastating by showing them food before denying it. Brennan noticed the hesitation. Drink, he said in German. Es ist sicher. Safe. Real food. Still no movement. Trust required evidence they didn't have. Brennan sighed. Sound that was exhaustion rather than frustration. He walked to the table with pots, ladled soup into a cup for himself, and drank. Visibly, obviously, completely. See? Not poisoned. Just soup. Drink. The demonstration broke the paralysis. One woman, older, maybe 45, raised her cup and tasted. Then another. Then Lotta, lifting the cup to her lips, feeling hot liquid on her tongue. The taste was overwhelming. Salt and fat and vegetables and something that might be chicken or pork. Her shrunken stomach cramped at the sudden input, but she forced herself to swallow. Then another sip, and another. Small amounts because drinking too fast would cause vomiting. Around her, 30 women drank soup with the focused intensity of people who'd forgotten what food tasted like. Some cried while drinking. Others made small sounds. Not quite moans, not quite whimpers. The noise of people experiencing relief so intense it bordered on pain. Lotta finished her soup in perhaps 15 small sips spread over 5 minutes. When the cup was empty, she stared into it, seeing residue clinging to the metal sides. 6 ounces of thin soup. Maybe 200 calories. Not nearly enough to address the deficit from 4 days without food, but enough to signal that starvation might not be immediate future. If this makes you question everything you thought you knew, you're paying attention. Subscribe now. These stories deserve to be heard. For 12 years, Lotta had absorbed propaganda about what happened to German women captured by Allied forces. The messaging had been explicit and specific: violation, torture, execution. The British were portrayed as slightly more civilized than Soviets, but only marginally. Women could expect abuse, particularly if they were young and not completely destroyed by hardship. The propaganda films had been careful to suggest rather than state explicitly, but the message was clear. Capture meant losing control of your body, experiencing violence, and eventually dying after serving as entertainment. Lotta had attended briefings in April 1945 as Wehrmacht collapse became inevitable. The officer conducting the session, Captain Muller, whom she'd never seen again, had been direct. If captured by British, expect interrogation followed by abuse. They will use you, then dispose of you. There is no honor in survival, only in resistance or self-termination. He hadn't distributed cyanide capsules. Administrative staff weren't considered security risks worth that expense. But the implication was clear. Death was preferable to capture. Capture meant experiences worse than death. The 4 days since British forces had overrun Lotta's position had seemed to confirm the first part of that narrative. They'd been captured, processed, provided no food or care, treated with indifference bordering on cruelty. She'd assumed the next phase would be the promised abuse, the systematic violation that propaganda had prepared her for. Instead, she'd received soup. Brennan collected the empty cups, stacking them on the tray, and spoke again in his rough German. More soup. Second portion. Small. Your stomachs need adjustment. The soldiers distributed second cups, perhaps 4 ounces this time. Smaller portions because Brennan clearly understood refeeding protocols. Lotta drank hers more slowly, savoring each sip, feeling warmth spread through her chest, and the fog in her mind beginning to lift slightly. 2 portions of soup. Maybe 350 calories total. Still inadequate, but movement in the right direction. When all cups were collected after the second portion, Brennan addressed them again. You are now part of my work detail. 30 women. You will live together, work together, eat together. While you are under my supervision, certain rules apply. He paused, seemed to be choosing words carefully in German he clearly struggled with. No one will hurt you. No one will abuse you. You will work, yes. You will follow orders, yes. But you will be fed. You will have shelter. You will be treated. Correct. Correct. Fair. He gestured to one of the younger soldiers, spoke to him in rapid English, then turned back to the women. I tell you now, very clear, so no confusion later. He paused again, struggling with German vocabulary, then said in English with heavy emphasis, You're mine now. The words detonated like grenades in the quiet room. Lotta felt her blood turn to ice. Her stomach clenched despite the soup. You're mine now. The phrase she'd been dreading. The declaration of possession, of ownership, of entitlement to do whatever he wanted without constraint. Propaganda had prepared her for exactly these words, usually followed by the violence they implied. Around her, women reacted with visible terror. Hannah made a sound, small, choked noise of pure fear. Another woman started crying, hands over her face. A third stood up, flight instinct overriding exhaustion, but had nowhere to go. Brennan noticed the reaction immediately. His expression shifted from professional neutrality to something like alarm. He held up both hands, palms out, universal gesture of no threat. Nein, nicht. Not like that. He struggled for German words, frustration visible on his face. Mine means under my Schutz, protection. He gestured to himself, then to the women, then to the door. Others cannot. Anderen können nicht. You are safe from others. The explanation penetrated slowly. Lotta's panicked mind tried to parse what he was saying. Not possession for exploitation. Possession for protection? The concept seemed impossible. Why would captor protect prisoners from other captors unless the intention was to reserve the prisoners for his own exploitation? Brennan seemed to read her skepticism. He turned to the younger soldiers, spoke rapid English. Lotta caught the word, explain, and help. Then one of the soldiers left the room quickly. Brennan remained facing the women, hands still raised in that no-threat gesture, speaking carefully in broken German. British Army has rules. Geneva rules. Prisoners must be sicker, safe. Some soldiers not follow rules. Some soldiers bad men. If you are officially mine, my detail, they cannot touch you. I enforce rules. Verstehen? The logic was becoming clearer, though still difficult to believe. He was claiming them as his responsibility, so that other soldiers couldn't claim them. It was protection through formal ownership, rather than exploitation through informal possession. The distinction was crucial, but required trusting that British Army regulations actually meant something, that rules were enforced, that civilization persisted in some form. The soldier who'd left returned with an older woman in women's auxiliary service uniform, maybe 60, with iron-gray hair and an expression of weary competence. She spoke German fluently, accent that suggested she was native speaker. She addressed the terrified women. I am Mrs. Hoffman, liaison officer. Sergeant Brennan has requested I clarify his statement, which was poorly translated due to his limited German. She paused, scanned the room, noted the fear. When he said, "You're mine now," he meant that you have been formally assigned to his supervision. Under British Army regulations, prisoners assigned to a specific sergeant become that sergeant's responsibility. He is accountable for your well-being, your safety, and your treatment. This also means, and this is what he was trying to communicate, that other soldiers cannot harass you, cannot make demands of you, cannot approach you without going through proper channels. You are under his protection. This is documentation of responsibility, not declaration of ownership for exploitation. The explanation settled over the room like blanket, muffling panic but not eliminating it entirely. Words were just words. Actions would prove whether those words meant anything. Brennan spoke to Mrs. Hoffman in English. Then she translated. Sergeant Brennan says he understands you have no reason to trust British soldiers. He says he will demonstrate through actions rather than words that his intention is protection. Starting with medical examination by female staff only, housing with female guards only, and food on regular schedule. He says, she paused, seemed to be translating carefully, that his sister was murdered by German soldiers in 1940 during the Blitz. He has every reason to hate German women. But hate is not policy. Policy is treating prisoners according to regulations, ensuring they are fed and safe and treated humanely. He will enforce that policy for you, not because he likes you, but because it is the correct thing to do. The honesty was startling. Admitting hatred but choosing to act against it, admitting personal motivation for cruelty, but choosing regulations over revenge. This was more credible than claims of benevolence would have been. Brennan collected the empty cups, stacked them on the tray, then spoke to Mrs. Hoffman. She translated, "Medical examinations will begin in 30 minutes. You will be examined by Dr. Patricia Warner and her staff, all female. Then you will be assigned to housing. Dinner at 18. Any questions?" Lotta had thousands of questions, but one rose above the rest. How often will we be fed? Mrs. Hoffman translated the question to Brennan. He responded in English, which she then translated. 3 meals daily. Breakfast at 7:00, lunch at 12:00, dinner at 18:00. Portions will be small initially because your stomachs are damaged from starvation. As your digestion improves, portions will increase. Medical staff will monitor your refeeding. 3 meals daily. The promise seemed impossible after 4 days with nothing. But the soup had been real. Maybe the meals would be too. Over the following days, Lotta learned that Brennan's promises weren't empty words. Medical examination occurred as stated. Dr. Warner was thorough, professional, documented signs of malnutrition and dehydration without judgment. Housing was a converted dormitory with bunk beds, relatively clean, supervised by Women's Auxiliary Corps officers rather than male guards, and food arrived on schedule. Breakfast was porridge and bread, lunch was soup and potatoes, dinner was stew with vegetables. The portions were small, increasing gradually as their bodies adapted, but they were consistent. Brennan supervised with distant efficiency. He wasn't friendly, didn't joke or engage in personal conversation, but he was present. Each morning, he conducted roll call, checked for anyone who'd fallen ill during the night, ensured the day's work assignments were clear. Each meal, he appeared to verify that food distribution was occurring properly. Each evening, he did final check before lights out. The work assignments began on the 3rd day. Nothing brutal. Laundry, kitchen assistance, facility maintenance. Tasks that were necessary rather than punitive, performed under supervision that enforced effort without demanding impossibility. Lotta was assigned to kitchen work, peeling vegetables, washing dishes, assisting with food preparation. The work was hard for someone still recovering from starvation, but it was purposeful. The vegetables she peeled would become part of meals that included her own rations. The dishes she washed would serve food to her fellow prisoners. There was satisfaction in contributing to the system that was sustaining her. During a break on her 5th day of kitchen work, something unexpected happened. Brennan entered the kitchen carrying a crate. He set it down near where Lotta was working and began unpacking contents. Tin cups, dozens of them, dented and worn but functional. He sorted them into stacks, then spoke to the kitchen supervisor in English. The supervisor, Corporal Davis, 40-something with kind eyes, nodded and gestured to Lotta. "Help distribute these," Mrs. Hoffman translated, appearing to facilitate. "Each prisoner gets 1 cup. It's theirs to keep, for water, for tea, for whatever. Personal possession." Lotta picked up one of the tin cups, feeling dented metal and smooth interior, worn by years of use. This was identical to the cups that had held the first soup, the second soup, every subsequent meal. Standard military issue, nothing special. But giving prisoners personal cups rather than requiring them to share communal vessels, that was small dignity, acknowledgement that they were individuals who deserved personal property. She helped distribute the cups that afternoon, handing one to each woman in their group of 30. When she gave Hannah her cup, Hannah held it with both hands, examining it as though it were valuable artifact, rather than dented military surplus. "It's just a cup," Lotta said quietly. "It's proof," Hannah responded. "Proof we're being treated like people. People have belongings. Objects for torture don't get personal property." The logic was sound and disturbing in equal measure. The cup became symbol, evidence that Brennan's promises of protection and fair treatment might actually be genuine rather than elaborate deception. Over the following weeks, small gestures accumulated into pattern. In July, Brennan arranged for prisoners to receive writing materials, paper, pencils, envelopes, for correspondence with families. The letters would be censored, but they could write. In August, he authorized use of a small garden plot where prisoners could grow vegetables to supplement rations. Nothing elaborate, tomatoes, lettuce, herbs, but the ability to cultivate something, to see growth rather than only destruction, had psychological benefit beyond nutrition. By September, Lotta's body had recovered substantially. Adequate food over 3 months had restored weight, not to pre-war levels, but to functional health. Her hair had regained some shine. Her skin had lost the gray tinge of malnutrition. Her energy had returned enough that work didn't feel like torture. She looked in the mirror one morning and saw someone who could be mistaken for healthy civilian rather than starving prisoner. The recovery was visible in all 30 women under Brennan's supervision. They'd transformed from skeletal figures who could barely walk to functional workers who could perform tasks, maintain hygiene, engage with their environment. The transformation was documented through photographs that Dr. Warner took for medical records, before and after images that showed dramatic difference between June arrival and September present. In October, an incident revealed both the system's structure and Brennan's commitment to protecting his detail. A new guard, Private James Cooper, 22, recently transferred, made inappropriate comment during an evening inspection. Lotta didn't understand the English words, but the tone and gesture were unmistakable. Before she could react, Brennan appeared from across the room. "Cooper, outside, now." Cooper tried to protest. Brennan cut him off with a voice like iron. "That wasn't a request. Move." They left. The women remained silent, uncertain. 10 minutes later, Brennan returned alone. He addressed them through Mrs. Hoffman. "Private Cooper has been removed from this facility and will face disciplinary action. No soldier under my command will harass prisoners. If anyone makes you uncomfortable or treats you inappropriately, you report it immediately. That is not negotiable." Cooper never returned. The message was clear. Brennan's protection wasn't theoretical. It was enforced policy, backed by his willingness to remove violators regardless of rank or circumstance. That night, Lotta sat on her bunk, holding the tin cup that had become her personal possession. She'd used it that morning for tea, that afternoon for water, that evening for soup. The cup was dented, scratched, worn from years of use before she'd ever touched it. But it was hers. Brennan had given it to her. Not personally, but as part of policy that treated prisoners as people deserving personal property. She thought about the moment he'd said, "You're mine now," and the terror that had flooded through her. She thought about the week since, the food on schedule, the work that was fair, the protection that was real. She thought about how words meant nothing without actions. But actions over time created trust even when initial words had seemed threatening. If you're beginning to see how deeply propaganda shaped every corner of this war, and how fragile those illusions were, subscribe now. The full picture is always more complicated than the myths. In November, Brennan assembled his detail for an announcement. Mrs. Hoffman translated, "Repatriation schedules are being finalized. You will return to Germany in groups, starting in January. Medical staff will ensure you're healthy enough to travel. You'll receive documentation of your treatment here, medical records, and small amount of money for initial needs. Between now and departure, work will continue as normal." January felt distant. Lotta had 4 months remaining under Brennan's supervision, 4 months of continued food and safety and work that had purpose. The prospect of returning to Germany was complicated. She had family in Berlin, obligations pulling her home. But leaving this structure, this predictability, this demonstrated protection, felt like loss, even though staying meant remaining prisoner. In December, Christmas arrived with modest celebration. Brennan arranged for small gifts, bars of soap, combs, socks, distributed to each prisoner. Nothing elaborate, but acknowledgement that even prisoners deserved recognition of holidays. He also permitted Christmas Eve service conducted by a chaplain. German hymns sung by women who'd survived to see another Christmas against their expectations. During the service, Lotta held her tin cup in her lap. She'd brought it because it held her evening tea, but also because it had become talisman, object that represented her entire experience here. The cup was dented, scratched, ordinary, but it was proof that Brennan's 4 words, "You're mine now," had meant protection rather than exploitation, responsibility rather than possession, civilization enforced through regulations rather than barbarism justified by war. On her last evening before repatriation, January 14, 1946, Brennan conducted final inspection of his detail. He moved through the dormitory, checking that everyone had proper documentation, that medical clearances were complete, that travel arrangements were confirmed. When he reached Lotta, he paused. "Sie haben gut gearbeitet," he said in his rough German. "You worked well." "Danke, Sergeant Brennan," Lotta responded. "For everything, for feeding us, for protecting us." Brennan nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. British Army regulations, nothing personal. It felt personal. When you said, "You're mine now," I thought, I know what you expected. Propaganda teaches fear. I understand. But regulations are regulations, regardless of what propaganda says. He paused, seemed to consider whether to say more. My sister, Martha. She died in a bombing raid. German plane dropped incendiaries on our street. She was 17. His voice was flat, reciting facts without emotion. I could hate every German woman I see because German actions killed her. But that would make me the monster propaganda says I am. Easier to follow regulations, treat prisoners correctly. Hate doesn't help anyone. The confession was gift. Acknowledgement that protecting them had cost him something, that choosing regulations over revenge was active choice rather than easy default. Lotta didn't know how to respond adequately, so she simply said, "I'm sorry about your sister. And thank you for choosing regulations." Brennan handed her a small cloth bag. "For the journey. Nothing much, but yours." Inside were provisions: bread, cheese, dried fruit, and a new tin cup. Not dented, not scratched. Freshly issued. Lotta held the new cup, comparing it to her old one with its accumulated damage. "I'd like to keep the old one," she said. "If that's permitted." Brennan looked surprised, then shrugged. "Both, then. Old one's seen more than most people. Earned retirement." The journey home took 6 days. Transport to Calais, ferry across the Channel, train through occupied Germany to Berlin. Lotta carried her bag with few possessions. Letters from family, the clothes she'd received at camp, the provisions from Brennan, and 2 tin cups wrapped carefully to prevent damage. Berlin was worse than letters had described. Entire districts reduced to rubble, people living in damaged buildings, food shortages that made British rations seem lavish. Her family's apartment was partially destroyed, 3 rooms habitable, shared with another family. Her mother looked ancient, ravaged by war, but she wept when Lotta arrived, holding her daughter with desperate strength. "You survived. You came home healthy." "How?" "British sergeant," Lotta said simply. "He said, 'You're mine now,' and I thought it meant something terrible, but it meant protection. He enforced regulations, fed us, kept us safe." Her mother held her tighter. "Then he was good man, even if he was enemy." Decades later, in a rebuilt Berlin apartment, Lotte Neumann, remarried, mother of 2, grandmother of 6, kept 2 tin cups on a shelf in her kitchen. One was dented and scratched, worn from years of use before she'd ever touched it. The other was pristine, never used, preserved exactly as Brennan had given it. Both were British military issue, identical except for condition. Her grandson, 14 and studying World War II in school, asked about them one afternoon. "Oma, why do you keep those old cups? They're just dented military junk." Lotta was making tea, habit she'd maintained for 40 years, always in proper cups now, but the ritual stemming from those months of drinking from tin. She set down the kettle and picked up the dented cup, feeling metal that was familiar as her own hands. "These are from England, from when I was prisoner. A British sergeant gave them to me." "Why? Were you friends?" "Not friends. He was my captor. But he was good captor, if such thing exists. He said 4 words that terrified me. 'You're mine now.' I thought they meant he would, hurt me. But they meant he was taking responsibility for protecting me. And he did. Fed us. Kept us safe. Enforced regulations when easier choice would have been cruelty. So he was nice? Not nice. Correct. He did what regulations required even when it cost him emotionally. His sister had been killed by Germans. He could have justified revenge. Instead, he chose civilization. These cups remind me that sometimes the scariest words turn out to mean the opposite of what you fear. Sometimes possession means protection. Sometimes "you're mine" means you're safe. Before you go, subscribe. Because history isn't just what happened. It's what we choose to remember and why. The cups remained on the shelf, dented and pristine side by side, testimony to the moment 4 words had meant terror, followed by protection. Lotta drank tea daily, always conscious that the ability to choose her cup, to drink without fear, to exist in safety, was gift that had come from unexpected source. Enemy soldier, who'd chosen regulations over revenge, protection over exploitation, civilization over barbarism. The measure of a person, of a man, of a soldier, of anyone with power over others, isn't found in what they could do, but in what they choose not to do. Brennan could have exploited. He could have ignored regulations. He could have justified cruelty as retaliation for his sister's death. Instead, he'd chosen to feed starving women, to protect them from other soldiers, to enforce standards, even when hatred would have been understandable. And the measure of civilization is found in those 4 words, correctly understood. You're mine now, not as declaration of ownership for exploitation, but as formal acknowledgement of responsibility for protection. Power as obligation rather than opportunity. Authority as duty rather than privilege. Possession as protection rather than entitlement. The dented tin cup sat in morning light, scarred but whole, testament to the truth that sometimes the scariest words mean safety. Sometimes captors become protectors. Sometimes regulations matter more than hate. Sometimes civilization is just that simple. Soup in a tin cup, given to starving women by a soldier who'd lost his sister to their countrymen but chose to feed them anyway. Sometimes the measure of humanity is found in the gap between what we're permitted to do and what we actually do, in the space between revenge and restraint, in the choice to protect even when we have every reason to harm. The tin cups testified to this truth. Dented metal, holding decades of memory. Reminder that 4 words can mean terror or safety depending on the actions that follow. That possession can be protection. That even in war, especially in war, choosing civilization over cruelty matters more than any victory.